And welcome to the Daily Space Weather viewers. The coronal mass ejection that I forecasted yesterday is indeed on its way. It's 100% Earth facing. More on that in a minute. Before we do that, let's take a look at some images of the local yellow dwarf. We're going to look at 171 angstroms and 304 angstroms in the form of a 48-hour video. Here's the first one. It's 171 angstroms. And that coronal mass ejection, I believe, came right out of this area right here. More like here. I'll let that play through a second time so you can see it. You see a little darkening right there. And more or less coming out of the middle of the sun and headed directly toward Earth. Now it could still miss a little bit to the east, which would be to your left, which is where the solar weather rises from. And here's the 304 angstroms view. And we see some filaments around the limb, especially a very large one up in the northwest. And pretty much lots of plasma filamentary activity going on right now, folks. A prime example of how we don't need anything like sunspots or solar flares to have coronal mass ejections. So let's take a look at the view from stereo A, which is where I derived the information from. And this is stereo A, located a few months behind the Earth, orbitally speaking, but able to see weather first, coming from the sun. And here's the view from the coronagraph out at stereo A, and you can see that the coronal mass ejection I forecasted yesterday is indeed on its way. And it's pretty much entirely Earth-facing. But again, keep in mind, these are moving objects, so it could miss a bit to the east. And when we see coronal mass ejections off to the west on the coronagraph from SOHO, that's an indication that we're going to run right into it. So now here is the coronagraph from SOHO. This is in between the Earth and the Sun, so this is located in this position, as opposed to out here where stereo A is. And there's the coronagraph, and you can see ejecta on both sides of the disk, an indication that at least some component of that coronal mass ejection is absolutely Earth-facing. So really this is 4 coronal mass ejections in a row. I guess it's really 4 out of 5 days, as we've talked about coronal mass ejections every day for the past 5 space weather videos. If you haven't watched the old ones, feel free to go watch the old ones, as they've been demonetized. What a surprise. So here's the helioviewer.org view, and we're going to fade from 171 angstroms down to magnetogram, and you can see a little bit of activity up here. It's a cycle 25 plage. Oh, I forgot, helioviewer.org doesn't like my epic pen. And there you can see some activity there, not to be confused with a sunspot. And let's move on to more data. KP index is at 1. 10.7 centimeter 10.7 centimeter radio flux is still at 69. Basically solar minimum conditions. X-ray flux is pretty much totally flatline there, despite a little bit of activity, and again, no sunspots. Did you watch yesterday's video about the Neil Gorell Swift Observatory, where we talk about Deneb? Celestial pole star, tail of the swan, Alpha Cygni, a star called Deneb, a massive X-ray binary, has come out of its quiescent state, and it's one of the most likely point sources for cosmic rays. We're not covering cosmic rays today, but we covered it yesterday, so perhaps watch yesterday's video, which has yet to be remonetized, as we've appealed it and we said nothing at all controversial, so cheers. Real-time solar wind data from Discover showing a 90-degree phi angle. The BZ component in the top pane, which is the red line, is diverging into negative territory there, indicating South Pole magnetic field. South Solar Pole magnetic field orientation of the total field, which is the black line in the top pane. Solar wind density at around 5 protons per cubic centimeter. Solar wind speed having ramped down over the past 12 hours, down to about 430 kilometers a second. There's the data from ACE Watch the refresh. And there's the current refresh. It looks like the phi angle is in a state of flux as it is currently shifting around. Keep an eye on the blue pane, and when I say ion, the pun is intentional. Next, we'll look at the geospace magnetosphere movies, as we do every day. This 4 hours of data, and things are fairly steady. No major magnetic shifting going on or anything there, and a fairly steady solar wind. Next, we'll look at ground geospace magnetic perturbations and see if and how much current is being induced beneath your feet. So, coming a little closer to home, here are the ground geospace magnetic perturbations. Again, 4 hours of data, and we archive this daily on the videos. If you want to see what happened on a different day, go watch our video from that day, as we produce daily space weather videos every day, hence the title, Daily Space Weather Videos. And we've got 2 poles and a creepy south pole. 2 poles in the north and a south pole creeping into the Indian Ocean, southwest of Australia. And yes, the geomagnetic South Pole has already left Antarctica. GOES magnetometers are looking spiky. No surprise there, as we keep forecasting it on the daily. And we have some missing data in the electron flux. We'll get to it in a minute. First, let's look at the magnetic data via Gong 2. And for you new viewers out there, thanks for subscribing. This is based on about 50 ground magnetometers, 51 actually, as well as magnetometers out here at stereo B and out here at stereo A. And this enables us to forecast things we would otherwise not be able to. And we see a little bit of North Pole polarity sneaking through there. Otherwise, the entire current sheet, at least the part of it on which we live, is South Pole polarity, shown there in red. Here's the line of sight ecliptic plane. This is the line of sight, not line of sight. This is the line of sight field plot. There you go. Showing the B field in blue and the north solar polar field in green, south solar polar field in red. Nothing to write home about there. And here's that electron flux data we're talking about. Relativistic electrons have come up a little bit. And the GOES electron flux is looking pretty cratered here. And let's see. Expecting this to remain in a fairly normal range today, similar to yesterday. Here's the total electron content, and GPS errors look like they'll be minimal even around the equator. We've got deadly tornadoes hitting Nashville. We'll cover it in a minute. First, the ionosphere. And there's the ionosphere. Looking like we could have some measurement errors around the prime meridian once again. I don't know what else to say about that, other than these blobs of charged particles are likely not forming in straight lines right on the prime meridian. And it probably has to do with the measurement and the dates. We won't get into the stats. Here's the latest image. It's at 10:15 UT. And there's yesterday's video, Demonetized. By the way, we've put up one today entitled, Google is actively interfering in the 2020 US presidential election as it did in 2016. Also, check us out on Twitch, as when we have to do a live stream, we tend to do it there because it's a better platform for live streaming than YouTube. Also, check me out on Instagram, where I do things like say good morning from the trail. And please consider supporting the channel via Patreon, the real source of funding, as Google does everything it can to prevent our videos from getting us paid in any way. So thanks, patrons, the real assistant and associate producers of the program, and also thanks to our Subscribe Star base. Our patrons and our Subscribe Stars get the information before everybody else, so consider supporting us for that reason. Also, follow us on alt tech such as BitChute, and we're getting more views there, a lot more views than on YouTube. Another indication that our content is 100% shadow banned and purged from search results on the Google Junkware platform, YouTube. We're also on Minds. It's minds.com/smAsho, the social media that won't censor you, and we're pushing 600,000 views there and putting all kinds of exclusive content up. So check out minds.com, the social media that won't censor you. Next, we'll look at windy.com's pressure map. We're going to let it advance about 24 hours. If you know why we look at the pressure map, more power to you. If not, we'll have to explain it on a different video, as we don't want this video to be too long. There's where things will be at 1 o'clock p.m. my time tomorrow. A series of competing low and high pressure zones around the northern hemisphere. And hey, I'm back to cover the earthquakes. Here's the past 24. And we're just going to scroll up the list. Nothing over a 6 magnitude, it looks like. And a couple deep quakes, but overall, not that many, I think. There's an extremely deep one at 533 kilometers at Fiji. It's a 4.5 magnitude. And scrolling up the list, there's one of the South Sandwich Islands. It's only a 5.1 magnitude in a very desolate portion of the world. And I'm just going to scroll up the list here. One down there at Macquarie Island, so some very far south quakes. Here's a quake at extreme depth, and it's extremely high at 400 meters above sea level at a depth of negative 0.4 kilometers. So there's another quake under Mauna Loa. And we also see Rupahu having additional tests done on it. That's a volcano on the North Island of New Zealand. So there's actually 2 quakes that happened within 20 seconds of each other. And this one occurred underneath Kilauea. So there you can see where that was. That's right near some new real estate that was created in 2018, I guess, when Kilauea started, again, creating new real estate. That was only a 3.0 magnitude. And just scrolling up the list, there's a deep quake at Dominica. It's a 4.0 magnitude. And let's move on to more stuff. By the way, we've got an extensive data repository on smashomash.com/forum in the free-for-all forum about Hong Kong virus, otherwise known as COVID-19, because I guess it's racist to say Hong Kong virus. Were you aware that the coming economic collapse will not be caused by COVID-19? No! It'll be caused by the bubble economy that's been inflated by cheap Federal Reserve money, causing inflation, which is the price of all of these expensive stocks. And inflation is the reason, as these companies are incentivized to purchase their own stock, as it is a very good investment for them to inflate their stock price by paying executives via stock options instead of salaries, both for the tax ramifications of the executives and for the tax ramifications of the company and for the share price of the company. Also, these companies buy back their own stocks, and this is all based on the ability to borrow cheap money, as banks will definitely send out the loans to junkware manufacturers like Google and Facebook, who will buy back their own stock. And this is largely the reason why the stock market is going to crash, probably going to continue to crash. I'm surprised there was any sort of a lull in gold and silver, and we talked about it on our Google is interfering actively in the 2020 elections, as it did in 2016 video, so perhaps watch that if you haven't. Next, we're going to talk about COVID-19. And total confirmed cases, over 90,000 now. And we're up to 105 cases in the U.S., 3,117 deaths total. Here's the graph. And we see that yellow bar at the bottom, which is cases outside of China going up. That's a bad thing. And don't forget this green bar, which is total recovered cases. Keep in mind, folks, this remains underreported as people are being quarantined, and you can't diagnose somebody with anything when they're quarantined. Next, we'll do volcanoes. Mount Aso on the list, producing a 6,000-foot ash plume. Mount Merapi, exploding, 20,000-foot plume there. Mount Yasur on Vanuatu, exploding, 5,000-foot plume there. And here's the information about Rupahu on the North Island and New Zealand. CO2 and sulfur have increased since the last measurements on February 7th. Water samples are being chemically analyzed, and the results are expected next week. Popocatépetl also exploding, 20,000-foot plume down there in Mexico. Revenador exploding, 15,000-foot plume there. Sabancaya exploding, flight level 25,000. Please do not fly your homemade ultralight helicopter over Sabancaya, and please do not fly your homemade ultralight helicopter during a tornado like this one that occurred in Nashville. At least 2 dead as a result. This article from CNBC.com. And we see a bunch of lightning still striking the U.S. Let's take a close-up. Hey, Knoxville. Are you camping in Smoky Mountains National Park right now? If so, there's thunder rolling in. Check out lightningmaps.org if you hear some, as it could save your bacon. Or perhaps your London broil. Or maybe even your boneless chuck roast. I don't know. Here's a value-added service in the form of the U.S. Doppler radar map. And let's zoom in on these areas over Kentucky as they're looking pretty stormy. And that looks like a bunch of isolated, relatively small systems there, but they're relatively strong systems, probably caused by huge pressure gradients. We won't get into it, but we'll show you the gradients in a minute. First, we're going to look at the jet streams. We're going to look at the jet streams. And there you can see that extreme bend, this 180-degree turn over only a couple hundred miles, injecting some cold air into the southwestern U.S. Meridional jet stream flow at its finest. Let's look at the eastern world and move on, as we got to get this video out. As we are not streaming this one live, but we reserve the right to do it whenever we want. There's the eastern jets, and I would note this area here, west of Australia, where the jet stream is moving in a very odd direction, basically a full-fledged opposite flow jet stream there, making for some odd flights. Here are the water vapor maps for Africa and Europe. Here are the water vapor maps for the Far East, Oceania, Australia, etc. Here's a U.S. water vapor map. And you can see these massive pressure gradients here over western Kentucky. Let's zoom in. And there's that system. Look at the great Hall current streamers. All of these parallel lines down here that are going this way. See all those parallel lines? If you think those are chemtrails, seek a psychiatrist. Nice. And keep in mind the resolution on these images, folks, is 2 kilometers. That means 1 pixel is 2 kilometers. If you think a plane is able to make a contrail that big, I don't know, take a physics class. Hey, Smash team, thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for 3 bonus features. First, it's the intensitygram to show you 0 sunspots. Second, it's the magnetogram to show you the fields in their most current state. And last but not least, it's the 48-hour video of the local yellow dwarf at 94 angstroms. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, stare at the sun, use the proper instruments, don't fall for scams like Google. And when you stare at the sun, don't drink, and if you do drink, don't drive. And since it'll never be now again, may the solar wind be at your back.